The US Army is quietly building this massive new fleet of 3,000 tracked armored vehicles. But weirdly, this billion-dollar program has flown completely under the radar with no one talking about it, and many don't even know it exists, even though it'll make up 30% of the future heavy armored brigades in the US Army.
What are you doing?
And they've gone just full sicko mode with its firepower. I'm talking about versions with rapid fire mortars, Javelin anti-tank missiles, 30mm autocannons, or Stinger anti-air missiles that can clap the cheeks of enemy drones. And it does all this while carrying a bunch of infantry in the hull, fueled by ripets and hate. In this episode, I want to explore with you why the new armored multi-purpose vehicle is getting so little attention, and how it will revolutionize the way that the US Army uses its support vehicles in combat. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Let's find out. But before we get into that, the only way this video is possible is thanks to Odoo. Odoo prides itself on the motto, "Unity makes creative strength," and through its robust, seemingly never-ending suite of business management applications, its ability to unite with my creative workflow, for one, has proven to strengthen pretty much every aspect of my day-to-day operations. And today, I want to focus mainly on my favorite part of the platform, and what I think really differentiates it from a lot of other competitors out there, its user interface. No matter whether you're using just one application or you have many applications across multiple businesses in different cities, selecting your database to reflect exactly what you want to see is as easy as a touch of the button, and it's completely customizable. That means you can collate and function the right data at the right time, which I've found to drastically decrease the amount of time that I spend on things like balancing budgets, authorizing payroll, and checking sales trends. So if you're looking for a simple and easy to use software platform for business management, be sure to check out Odoo.com. The first application is free for life. You don't even need a credit card. Initially, the Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle, or AMPV as it's called, started its life in 2014 as a humble replacement for the ancient fleet of Vietnam-era M113s. If you ask me, it's kind of crazy to think that it took that long for them to start replacing vehicles from the 1960s. Originally, the defense company BAE Systems won the proposal to replace the 113 by suggesting hey, what if we just gutted the M2 Bradley chassis so that it was turretless and we use that? Stop trying to use logic, Carl. This is the defense industry. We don't do that here. By the way, you're fired. Using a version of the Bradley hull would save oodles of money each year, like $2 billion, and it would make spare parts commonality among the majority of tracked armored vehicles. But we'll see, it ended up being much more than that. Because after producing a couple hundred vehicles, in October 2024, the world was shocked to see the full potential of the AMPV. They revealed video footage of it with a turret and a freaking 30mm autocannon on top. I admit, I am a simple man. I see a death machine that spits high explosive rounds, and it has my undivided attention. Unlike the Bradley, this turret is unmanned, which means there's a lot more space in the hull for extra supplies or infantry. So much room for activities. I mean that sincerely. Look at this diagram that looks like an AMPV swallowed an M113 whole. The gray area shows the size of the old M113 versus the new AMPV. It's 78% bigger. This thing has a lot more space. You might think that because it's the larger caliber than the Bradley 25 Mike, that's the reason why it's better, but mainly the bigger 30mm round really just allows for the new use of high-tech ammo like airburst rounds. The whole system is called the Kongsberg medium caliber turret, made by the Norwegian company, which explains why it's so sexy. The old M2 Bradley turret took up a lot of space and sat 2 people inside of it, making it really cramped like a case of sardines. Here's a good diagram that shows the difference, I think. See how the manned turret in the Bradley takes up about half the space of the hull? No bueno! This new one removes the need for any of that. Net Warriors in the comment section on the AMPV were quick to point this out, saying, quote, "Wouldn't that just make it back into a Bradley again?" Laugh out loud. They said, "Mom, I want XM30. We have XM30 at home." Well, that's just a Bradley with 5 more millimeters. Literally, are we just reinventing the Bradley here with more utility? And one other Net Warrior said, Turreted turretless Bradley. Fellow internet gentlemen, you make great points. I guess it is kind of an off-brand next-generation infantry fighting vehicle, but there are some major changes here, I think, that make it more of an alternative brand than an off-brand. The AMPV continued to get even more based when they added a remote-controlled cannon with no turret whatsoever. This weapons package even showed that you could put a Javelin anti-tank missile on there instead of the tow missile. The ugly duckling just got beautiful. Sure, there's downsides to no turret system, it's not stabilized, but this was still impressive, I think. And there are even versions that fire 4 Javelin anti-tank missiles so fast that it'll make your tank's turret pop. This was the moment when the significance of this program really dawned on me. Think about it this way. Legit 33% of the US Army's Armored Brigade combat team could now get a huge upgrade in firepower and anti-drone capabilities. The current plan isn't to create any of these 30mm cannon versions, but now that it's an option, it's something to keep an eye on for the future. Personally, I think the Army should invest more into these autocannon versions. I think the reason why this has gotten so little attention is because of the vehicle it's replacing. The old M113 was lacking in firepower and armor. For most of its history, it was relegated to roles in the rear. It was never given the sexy jobs of blowing the face off the enemy, which means people with my kind of tism didn't want to hear about that as much. But we'll see, that's all about to change. The US Army is now totally reimagining this whole concept of what a support vehicle could be in the future. A sign of the importance of the AMPV program is that in 2024, BAE Systems landed an additional $750 million contract, which added to their initial deal, and that means that America is now investing $1.6 billion into the armored multipurpose vehicle, which makes it one of the most significant capabilities currently in full rate production, and why I think it's worth talking about. I think this is the Army's best kept secret that's been hiding right in plain sight. Remember, those original hulls were mostly manufactured decades ago in the 1980s. Since then, technology's come a long way. Case in point, the new AMPV hull is manufactured from one single piece instead of being assembled from multiple pieces. It's one single monolithic hull. It's a combination of steel and spaced armor instead of old flimsy M113 aluminum ones. According to the company Alcoa that does this whole process of basically 3D printing hulls, they said, quote, based on early modeling and simulation, single-pieced underbody structures could provide 2 times better protection against blasts than traditional hulls, primarily by eliminating welded seams. In addition to survivability benefits, single-piece hulls can be optimized to reduce vehicle weight and assembly time, and therefore overall cost, end quote. So when you look closer, what's really going on here is that it's more than just an M2 Bradley 3.0. This is why, for the time being, I'm firmly in the AMPV enjoyer category. As they would say in the CIA, what's the bluff? The bottom line up front is that what all of this means is that the US Army, if they wanted to, could easily adapt thousands of AMPV vehicles into next-generation improved infantry fighting vehicles. Plus, compared to the M113, it would have a 600 horsepower engine with power generation abilities that can run all the sweet new systems and capabilities that we're about to get into. What we're seeing is people talking about how this AMPV could potentially be used as a kind of backdoor channel to build a next generation infantry fighting vehicle without saying they're building a next-generation infantry fighting vehicle. Another net warrior wrote on a popular forum, quote, until there is a real revolution in vehicle design, AMPV/Bradley upgrades still make more sense than an OMFV. The OMFV is, of course, the next-generation Bradley to replace the Bradley. So another keyboard warrior wrote, quote, so they take an M2 Bradley, an IFV, remove the turret, creating an AMPV, APC, then added again a turret because it looks cool. A gender fluid vehicle. So I have it on good rumor intelligence that the AMPV could potentially become an IFV for the US Army. If we wanted further proof of that, and that how they're trying to push this as a legit fighting vehicle, look at how BAE Systems entered it into the competition to become Romania's new IFV to replace their Soviet-era BMPs. See? Other completely mentally stable people see the connection too. It's not just me. How do we know that these vehicles are needed so badly on today's battlefield? To dig deeper, I read through this congressional research report, so you don't have to. It revealed that the US government has sent 300 M113s, 300 armored medical treatment vehicles to Ukraine. That's a total of roughly 600 of the M113s that were pulled from US Army National Guard units to send to Ukraine. That's twice the amount compared to the amount of M2 Bradleys that were sent. According to the CRS report, America's Army is replacing each of those 600 old vehicles with a brand new AMPV, and reportedly the whole reason the Pentagon was able to fast-track that program was thanks to transferring those old obsolete vehicles to Ukraine. The old M113 carriers in Ukraine were put to heavy use, we saw, providing their value in medical evacuations and transporting supplies and infantry to the front. But their limitations of armor and firepower were again on full display. It's not a perfect vehicle. On the famous website Oryx, which tracks all the losses of equipment, vehicles for both Russia and Ukraine, they reported 234 of the M113s had been destroyed or abandoned. That's roughly 39% of the total, and it makes it clear to me why these are called obsolete. If you're interested in learning more about the armored battle in Ukraine, I release weekly combat footage analysis episodes on Pepperbox TV. The link is in the description. Here's Bill Sheehy, BAE Systems program director for this project, and he said, quote, "Our goal with the AMPV common top plate has remained the same since day one. We are demonstrating the time and cost-effective options the AMPV brings to the table for soldiers who need new and evolving capabilities quickly so they're ready for today's battlefields and can easily adapt the unpredictable needs that will be occurring decades from now." End quote. I read that in a British accent because BAE Systems is a British company, but I just looked, and according to Bill's LinkedIn page, he was in the US Army for at least 9 years, so I need to issue a retraction and an apology for cultural appropriation. I'm sorry about that, Bill. But what I believe we're observing here is that the armorer designers who learned something valuable since the end of the Cold War. Big Army thinks that they know what they want 10 years from now, but rarely they actually do. So instead of trying to predict what they'll need in 10 years, BAE built the AMPV to be able to adapt to any request. It's like ordering the tour of Italy at Olive Garden or the breakfast sampler at IHOP. When you don't know what you want, it's nice to have all the options on the table, because the biggest revolution here is that the AMPV isn't just a one-trick pony, it's actually at least a 5-trick pony. You've got your general purpose version, your mortar carrier, medical evacuation treatment, mission command center, but there's also a huge list of unofficial versions, like when you order off the secret menu at In-N-Out. I'm hungry. There is a SHORAD anti-air version with 8 Stinger missiles, radar detection, and a 30 mic on top. And it's already been successfully live fired and tested against drones. Here's the video footage of the AMPV shooting down tiny drones at distance. It uses something called a slew to cue capability here. What it does is it automatically slews the cannon barrel to aim where the drone is queued up to, so the radar automatically aims the gun barrel and engages with proximity airburst rounds to explode near the drone. I love everything about this. I like the idea of a low-cost, flexible solution that's built on top of a proven platform. But don't worry, there's still plenty of time for the Army to prove me dead wrong. I've gone as far as I can into this video without using one of the defense industry's favorite buzzwords, but I can go no further. It must be said, the AMPV is modular. It's not just a shitty word used here to make it sound better, it can actually change in meaningful ways. Case in point, when I say the AMPV is a mortar carrier, I'm not talking about like the old lame Striker mortar or the 113 mortar carrier, which basically just opened up the back and surprise, there's a 120mm mortar team hidden back there. That's more like a Striker clown car convertible that comes down and awkwardly reveals a couple of 11 Charlie mortarmen waving hello in the back. Hinges for a hatch isn't exactly new tech, and even a fully Riri guy like myself could figure that out. No, this is a new system. This is a self-propelled automatic mortar cannon on a turret called the Patria Nemo. Nemo meaning new mortar. It can shoot hate at the enemy while on the move at 10 rounds per minute. It can shoot mortar rounds while moving, and it automatically reloads those mortar rounds itself. I'm glad I looked deeper into it because it's pretty badass, and it will absolutely be a necessity for mortar teams to know about in the future. We rarely hear about the future of 11 Charlie and mortars, and I think this is it. When I saw the AMPV had a mortar version, I originally thought it was just that big hatch that opens up in the back, so it's nice to see they're really doing something different here. And that's when the Pentagon really started pressing for more AMPVs recently. BAE Systems is cranking these puppies out at an armorer factory in York, Pennsylvania. Bill Sheehy put it this way: "We produce all 5 on one production line. If the US Army says we need more medical evacuation versions, we can move the line to do just that." So switching to building any type based on the Army's needs is relatively easy today. We saw how the Stryker was repurposed with the same exact 30mm autocannon on top. In fact, the Marines' new amphibious vehicle also shares that same cannon. Even if all the AMPVs end up being produced without a 30mm cannon, without new mortar systems, they can easily be adjusted in the future. Now let's talk about this common top plate, or the external mission equipment package. I love all these acronyms. It's like the AMPV's secret weapon in adaptability. This top plate makes it easy to switch out equipment for different mission roles. This is one of the US Army's wet dreams, being able to just plug and play. And we're not talking about just a few changes here. This is compatible with over 30 different turret systems. The AMPV is a vehicle that evolves with the mission needs, without the logistical nightmare of how it was in the past where you had to switch out whole new models. BAE had this to say, quote, "The AMPV hull provides the US Army with a full spectrum of options for potential upgrades and mission roles beyond the current family of vehicles. The AMPV is truly future-proofed. That is my favorite type of spectrum, the full spectrum. Future-proof is code language for saying, this won't waste everyone's money, I promise." And I hope they're right. We see them trying to do this by adding in all new high-tech fancy communications and GPS systems. The old M113 didn't have the electrical power to support any of that. According to the Army, it didn't have any of the cooling needs either. It was like a shitty PC build that left out the water-cooled fans. By the book, I've seen it officially state that the AMPV can carry 2 crew and 6 passengers. But I've seen the back of the general purpose AMPV. I actually went into it when I visited a defense conference a couple of years ago in Washington, D.C., and I can confirm this is definitely, there's more room for just 6 guys. That field manual was probably written by someone who's never been asked to go nut to butt. Infantrymen get real comfortable fast when essentially sitting on one another's lap. That's why us mechanized infantry train for hours by playing long, hard hours of gay chicken. This M1283 version, or 1283 version, is a jack of all trades. For transporting troops and equipment, it's absolutely, okay, I'll be honest, it's boring as all get the fuck out. It's a toothless troop transport, and it's why you don't see 1,000 YouTube videos on this thing, but the nail is just as important, if not more important, than the tooth. Supplies and logistics vehicles are very key. One of the main concerns I heard from talking to soldiers and medics on the front lines in Ukraine is that they often have soldiers who get wounded but can't be evacuated out of there because of the threat of drones that prevent them from being picked up. That's why the medical evacuation versions are so important. You don't want guys with tourniquets on for 17 hours, which is what they're dealing with. It's like having a rolling emergency room. It can carry 4 litter casualties. On those litter casualties, like, we'll bring up a picture right here, but it's like a stretcher. It's another word for stretcher. So roads near the front are blown apart with craters from artillery shells and potholes, which makes actually working on a casualty while moving in a vehicle next to impossible. And that's why the AMPV has advanced suspension system, which mitigates those bumps and makes it possible for the medic to continue to render aid on the injured. Another major lesson from warfare today is that you can't set up a command post or battle tracking. If you do, your ass is going to get hit by the enemy missiles. And that's why the mission command variant of the AMPV is so critical, I think. This is the future of US Army doctrine. It'll be all about distributed warfare, having soldiers moved about not just in one centralized location, which if you've watched any of our episodes on the future of US Army doctrine, you're a true homie and you get how important this is. This command version has 3 workstation operators, all coordinating everything from artillery strikes to drone feeds to real-time battle tracking. But I think often quality matters more than quantity. And to find out the quality, let's hear what actual US Army soldiers' feedback is on them. Because at the end of the day, it's what the Joes who actually have to use these things think that really matters. The 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division, took these vehicles for a spin at Fort Hood. Lieutenant Colonel Adam Cannon said, quote, "The soldiers' feedback during the user test was extremely positive. It's simple, they want AMPVs now," end quote. I've seen firsthand instances where public affairs officers in the Army have lied by omission. They don't outright lie, they just don't tell the whole truth. So for instance, they might only reveal the positive feedback from troops and not submit the negative feedback. That could be what we're hearing here, but I don't think that's the case likely here. Staff Sergeant Pedro Villejas, one of the indirect fire infantrymen testing these vehicles, called it an honor to be chosen to test equipment that may be fielded to the wider force, end quote. So when you see cherry-picked comments, usually they won't be that enthusiastic. To me, that's an indicator that this is true, real feedback. If I'm wrong, please write me and let me know if something you hate about the AMPV and you've used it, so that I know what I've missed, so that I can be more accurate in my reports. But in the meantime, it appears that troops love the AMPV as far as I can tell. One of the things armored crews care about most is its ease of use and maintenance. Ain't nobody got time for a broke dick vehicle. Soldiers reported that the AMPV was more user-friendly than those old 113 platforms, with design tweaks that made it easier to access components for quick checks and repairs. It's designed with the realities of combat at the front line in mind, built so that people using it can actually maintain it without having to become full-time mechanics. Was it all sunshine and rainbows during testing? Of course not. There were issues with ramp cable design, there were problems, and they could have just shrugged and said that's good enough for government work, which is what I did with most of my time in the Army. But they took the negative feedback into account, they went back to the drawing board, and they made it work. On today's battlefield, your support units cannot be your weakest link. If we've learned anything recently, one vulnerable supply line, one exposed command post, one unprotected medical evacuation, and your entire operation could fall apart. That's why the US Army is pushing to have 5 batteries of this vehicle operational by 2028. This isn't a slow, gradual replacement program. This is a rapid modernization effort because the Army recognizes that the window for upgrading these capabilities isn't getting any wider. The threats are evolving now, and support vehicles need to keep pace. The old M113 was all about getting soldiers from point A to point B, and it did that. It did its job in history, its role, but the AMPV is about getting them there safely with everything that they need to get the job done. It's designed to be more than just a transport, it's support system, field hospital, command post, infantry fighting vehicle. By next year, they're planning to crank out 195 vehicles annually and continue to ramp that number up even higher until they reach 3,000, which is essentially the same size as a Bradley fleet. That's about a brigade and a half worth of vehicles each year. Could the infantry fighting vehicle version of the AMPV be a replacement for the Bradley? Possibly, but the XM30 is rumored to have capabilities that the AMPV couldn't match, like the 50mm cannon. The cost of 3,800 of the new XM30s could rise to as much as $45 billion, while creating that many new IFV versions of the AMPV might only cost in the ballpark of like $2 billion, based on the numbers I've seen. If the Army produces the 30mm versions of the AMPV, I think it could possibly be a good stopgap infantry fighting vehicle until the next generation ones are developed in the 2030s, if those ever even end up happening. I am reminded of how the Stryker was originally called the interim armored vehicle because it was only supposed to be a temporary stopgap solution. Fast forward 2 decades and the stubborn Stryker won't go away. Does that mean that that's going to happen here? Absolutely not. The AMPV might not be the most talked about vehicle out there, but it might just be one of the most important.